There are few games as overwhelming as Starfield. At times, Starfield feels like the moment when you first emerged from Vault 101 and Fallout 3 expanded across an entire game. The sense of wonder, adventure, and possibility is an intoxicating trick that never wore off during our time with the game. It's easily Bethesda's most accomplished game, and while nothing it does is revolutionary to the genre, and there's a fair amount of understandable copy and paste throughout the universe, it's an adventure that we thought about from the moment we woke up until we went to sleep, where it then invaded our dreams. You begin Starfield as a random Johnny Everyman miner on a remote planet working for a faceless corporation. You're tasked with unearthing a strange artifact that's been found on the planet. After touching the artifact, you experience a weird sensation like being one with the cosmos. Following this, you're approached by Constellation, a group that's dedicated to exploring the wider galaxy and discovering the secrets of these mysterious artifacts. It's here that the game basically turns to you and says, go. The whole universe is virtually unrestricted aside from a few systems that will require a more powerful ship towards the end of the game. Outside of that, whatever you want to do or not do is entirely up to you. The game's main quest, which surrounds Constellation and these strange artifacts, is actually somewhat shorter than we expected, but it's very clearly designed to be augmented by the several long faction-related quest lines, the mountain of side quests, and the ultimate quest to just explore. You can land on pretty much any planet, and it's impossible not to bring to mind No Man's Sky when you first arrive on the surface. Although crucially, landing on a planet itself is an animation and not player controlled, and there's also certain restrictions in terms of how much of a planet you can actually walk around. There's a huge amount of flora and fauna, and so many creatures that you're unlikely to see the same type of creature repeated, whether that be a giant hummingbird or a baby scorpion with 5,000 legs. These planets rarely have all that much to actually do on them, save for scanning the environment and collecting resources. But there's been just enough times where we've landed on a planet and found an interesting side mission or something we didn't expect that we're tempted to land on all of them. Thankfully, the game's quite good about telling you whether or not a planet is worth landing on from space. Starfield's missions are largely what you'd expect from a Bethesda game. It's a lot of going to X place to recover X item and to shoot everything in your way. There are the tropes you'd expect of certain characters being able to be persuaded to step aside rather than shot to pieces or threatened or something similar, but the actual role-playing isn't especially deep. There's no karma system, rather you'll be judged by your companions who'll also pop into conversations and can even unlock new conversational options depending on who you bring along with you. Starfield is very keen to give you as many companions as it can right off the bat, allowing you to build a huge crew for your ship. We got strong Mass Effect vibes every time we walked around the ship's cabin. While you'll eventually hear the same repeated dialogue when you land or when you take off from a planet, it made us want to take every single character to each of the conversations just to see what they would say. Speaking of conversations, Bethesda has made some changes to the dialogue system that are somewhat hit and miss. Skill checks for conversations are no longer just a raw number. Instead, there's a mini game wherein you're given a set number of opportunities to pick the right tone of response based on how the conversation has been going so far. So for example, if earlier in the conversation it seems like the person you're trying to get information out of is a bit of a coward, you can choose to threaten them, which can resolve the skill check. While we like this in most instances, there were a few times where none of the options seemed all that applicable, or the reason that the options we picked failed didn't seem entirely clear. It's certainly better than the raw number requirement of older BGS titles, but it lacks some of the conversational flair of something like a Baldur's Gate 3. Starfield is easily Bethesda Game Studios' strongest game from a combat perspective. Without the crutch of VATS from the Fallout games, gunplay was going to have to deliver, and it certainly does on PC. On Xbox, it's a bit of a tougher adjustment, and there's some imprecision that's sadly ingrained to the 30 FPS that can't be avoided. There's a huge variety of weapons, and the options for customizing them further are staggering. Perhaps the most surprising element of our time with Starfield was just how few bugs we encountered. At one point, a character turned to talk to us and his entire lower half was gone, leaving just a floating head and floating arms. However, the quest didn't break and it wasn't a big issue. It did strike us that after 40-ish hours on PC, this was the first real bug we encountered, and it was a minor one at that. One element of Starfield that we feel could be somewhat smoother is moving from system to system. While the game is much more forgiving in terms of where you can fast travel from, there are occasionally annoying moments wherein you attempt to fly to a far off system only to be told you don't have enough fuel. However, you do have enough to travel to each system on the way to that system. That doesn't really add immersion, it just adds loading screens. The next section will reflect our time with Starfield on Xbox Series X, and while the majority of the 80 hours of the game we've played so far were on the PC version, which runs impeccably, The Xbox Series X version doesn't fare quite so well. The downside to the Series X version were previously known, namely the 30 FPS, but sadly that's not where the shortcomings end. During our time with the game, the console version was significantly buggier than our PC journey, and load times were so long to the point where we wondered if the game had crashed several times. The whole Starfield experience is here, and you'll still have a wonderful time playing it, but it's disheartening to see just how far behind it feels from the PC version, especially as a flagship Xbox release. Things like bugs and loading times could theoretically be improved in the future, but often the not so rock solid 30 FPS and the inconsistent image quality were a disappointment. Starfield is an excellent game and a strong Game of the Year contender. It manages to, at the same time, refine the Bethesda formula while introducing an untold number of new mechanics and systems that many players will never interact with. Strangely, there's almost not enough handholding for most of it, as there's so much not spelled out to players that many will finish the main quest without seeing several of the large factions. The main narrative features genuine wow moments, even if some of the questions it asks aren't resolved in a hugely satisfying way. Combat has never felt better in a Bethesda game, and the changes to the Bethesda staples such as speech checks and the way companions works are mostly very welcome. We have played a ridiculous amount of this game, and we feel like we're only just starting to scratch the surface now that the main quest is over and the unique New Game Plus options have opened to us. Starfield is undoubtedly a game that players will explore for years. It's content rich in a way that modern games rarely are, but it's exactly the experience that those people who have been buying 10 different versions of Skyrim for a decade have wanted. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, and it might not win over any Bethesda detractors, but almost everything it does so well that it's a truly engrossing experience. We give Starfield 5 out of 5.